So Mayowa, great to have you. It's been close to 2 years now since we met face to face. Mayowa and we used to work at the same firm back in the day. Mayowa was building like the first digital bank in Africa. He was building like a whole bunch of amazing things. And then one day I wake up and Mayowa had left and got to start his own thing. So we are almost catching up for the first time in 2 years now. But Mayowa, thanks a lot. Really great to have you join.
Thank you. Thank you as well. Really good.
Very good. We're going to go into a bit more detail, but let's start with you. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about Traction Apps, who you are, what you do when it comes to Traction Apps? I think that'll be a great starting point.
Great. So my name is Mayowa Alli. I currently work at Traction Apps. I'm a co-founder at Traction. I lead Traction product and technology. Right. So essentially looking after what we build and how we build it. Traction itself is a merchant solution provider. So we build tools for small businesses, helping them to power, different aspects of their operations.
Now, before we delve into Traction Apps, right, I always find it very interesting to actually understand, for a lot of like entrepreneurs, tech startups, I always find it very interesting to figure out what is the backstory, what led them to this point. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your upbringing, so your family, where you went to school? Do you feel like any of these things played a big part in you deciding to take the entrepreneurial plunge and start to work on Traction? Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Cool. Yeah, so I grew up in Nigeria, in Ibadan, right? So Ibadan is like a city. It's like an hour from Lagos, right? So smaller town, less noisy, compared to Lagos. First child, family of 3 kids. But I think all through like growing up, right, I think everything has pretty much led to me, running a business, right? I think that's always, right from like whenever I can remember, that's always been something that, I always wanted to do, was run a business, right? My dad is also an entrepreneur, and, I get that was part of the inspiration, and, we used to spend a lot of time in his office. And so I guess that, that entire, seeing that entire setup was part of the early inspiration, right, to want to run a business. But I remember even when I was in primary school, right, I always used to sell stuff, right? So, when I was in primary school, my mom used to make pastry for us. And then I would basically go sell it, sell it in school, and then use it to buy sweet and sugar, essentially then, yeah. But then, fast forward kind of, when I school and then, went to university in Nigeria, at Covenant University. It was very interesting, right? Because when I filled my form to university, I actually filled business, as my course of study. And then my dad saw it, I was like, what is this?
But he was into business. He was into business. So why was he?
He was into business, right? But I guess he was into construction, right? He was civil engineer. And he's like, no, you can't, right? You have to study the word was a professional course, which typically then meant either it's medicine or engineering or accounting or law, those very prestigious sounding programs. And so I kind of got ultimately convinced to study electrical engineering in school, right? And so I went and I did it, right? But I think for me, from second year, it was okay, I know I'm definitely not going to practice engineering, right? And I kind of found my way back again on campus, back to entrepreneurship. And so, I did quite a number of business ventures. While in school, I published a magazine for high school students, ran a food delivery service on campus, sold random things like catfish. I'm probably like the most ambitious. The most ambitious is actually kind of like launching like a mini ISP on campus, like internet service provider, right? Because then on campus, like internet wasn't great. And so we like essentially got like a VSAT on campus and tried to, resell internet to students, even though that got shut down very quickly. But I think, yeah, for me, from 200 level, I was really clear that, I really wanted to be an entrepreneur. And to going into 400, 500 level, right, in like my final year in school, I'd interned. I'd done like an undergrad intern at a small like internet service provider in Ibadan, during my 4th year. And kind of identify like an interesting opportunity, right, in terms of like in reselling internet. And so that was actually what led to like me trying to build like an ISP on campus. But also figured out that actually, there were a number of private universities at the time that had the same problem, right, of like bad, like poor internet, right? And this was like 2005. And so I actually, my plan, out of university was to actually go start a business immediately, going around all the different private universities and, helping to build internet infrastructure for them, and then like build the students like, out of their fees. And we'd actually done a business plan, myself and another student at the time. But yeah, and then McKinsey happened.
Before we talk about McKinsey, I guess for me, what I'm wondering, and I guess this is also a little bit like myself, right? When I think about when I was, university, etc., right? It's like you were doing all of these things, right? You were, building an ISP on campus. You were publishing a magazine, the first teenage magazine. Like you're doing all of these bunch of stuff, right? The question I always wonder, and I know why, I know my answer to this, but why were you doing all of these things? I mean, you're in uni, you could have said, hey, I'm studying electrical engineering, I'm going to spend all my time, attend lectures, do all of these things. Why did you feel like you had to do all of these business, from magazines to ISPs to XYZ? Why do you think you're doing that?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of two things, right? I think first there is the innate restlessness, right, that I've always had, right, in terms of like, spots what I think is an opportunity and just want to do it or solve a problem. So I think that's one. Second was actually, I think, also a bit of some credit to like a university as well, to Covenant, right? It was also a school that was very big on entrepreneurship. Right. And so, right from like when we came in, like it was really like hammered into your head, right? Is you need to be a solution provider. You need to do this, there are no jobs out there. You need to be an entrepreneur. And they were one of the first schools that, we had like a course program called Entrepreneurial Development Studies, right? Which was like a 1 credit course, but was compulsory for everyone, right from like first year to final year. Right. And you also, as part of that, had to do like, they call it like EDS practicals then, where you had to go learn like some skill, right? Outside of like your typical books, right? So either you go learn printing, there are a bunch of things then, poultry and farming, just to make sure that you had something else you could. So I think, that being in that environment, right, also meant that, just everyone wanted to, and it wasn't just me, right? It was a school where like everyone was doing something complete outside of the academics, partly due to that inspiration. So I think it was those two reasons. Yeah.
So combination of just an inner restlessness to find problems, solve the problems you are facing, right, and also just the environment in Covenant. Fast forward, spend a bit of time in McKinsey, went to business school, and then interestingly, I think before you went to business, either before or after, you joined Conga, right? And I think for a lot of people who don't know about, the Conga story, I think now you've got a lot of big technology companies in Africa. But back in the day, it was literally Conga and Jumia, and those were like the first like truly big tech companies in West Africa, right? And it was like exciting time. Nobody knew how big this thing was going to be. So, before the payment companies of today, it was like Conga and Jumia, right? Why did you do that? Why did you join? Yeah. Why did you join Conga?
I think then it was really, I was super crystal clear that, technology was going to be the thing that I wanted to do. And so I was looking for exposure to technology after McKinsey. The way thing is, right? Like, in between business school, you've got like, a couple of gap months. And so it was like, okay, what do I go do? And so I was looking for a tech company. I had opportunity at a number of businesses to go work. I'd spoken then to a logistics business. I'd spoken to a payments business. And then there was Conga. And really, I joined Conga for two reasons. One was like Sim was an amazing, great salesperson. He could sell folks really quickly on the vision.
Exactly.
And so that was one reason. But second was that the role I was actually playing at Conga was really unique in that it actually gave me exposure to all of the three different things, right? So it gave me exposure to logistics. It gave me exposure to payment because Conga was building its own payment business at the time. And it basically gave me exposure to like, commerce and like managing, sellers and small businesses, at that time, right? And so for me, because it was really like a short space of time, I wasn't trying to be a domain expert. That was the perfect role where, in 6 months you can come and you can see a full, you can see like a full spectrum of how the industry works, right? Yeah. I think that, that those were, I was there for 5 months and then I went back for another 3 months, during my biz school internship. I think these were like some of the best like learning period that I had, right? Just being able to really, really, understand how a tech business runs, and, interfacing with engineers and, developers for the very first time, and also with business people. It was really valuable.
Very well. I think the interesting thing, you raised an interesting point, right? Which is, there's this school of thought that, typically before you actually go start a tech company or any company, right, for that matter, always good for you to actually go work with somebody who's actually doing it, right? And I listened to your story, right? And it's quite interesting how a lot of the work you're doing in Conga, it was obviously an e-commerce platform, but a lot of the sellers there were, small, SME type sellers, right? And fast forward,
exactly
6-7 years later, you are actually building payment systems and enterprise solutions for, SMEs, right? So I guess for me, the question I have is, do you feel like that experience was very critical in the path that you are on now? Or do you think you'd have done Fraction Apps, anyway, right? Without the whole Conga experience? Like, what do you think about that?
So I think that it was critical, right? So, in terms of like really learning, I think, even in terms of like, shaping what I did, at McKinsey, even when I came back, right? It was like super pivotal. Would I have been doing traction apps? I think I'd still be like running the tech business, irrespective. If I'd, even if I hadn't, maybe it wouldn't be for small businesses, right? Because just like you say, right, that was, where I started to really get that exposure into, to small businesses and kind of seeing how much, opportunity and, problems that these guys, had, right, in running their operations, right? So maybe I would have been doing something completely, random, like, invest tech or something, right? But I think that was the place where I first, really started to see that small business, opportunity. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So fast forward, you finish Conga, you come back to McKinsey the second step. Remember, sometime early early February 2020. One day I was actually having a conversation with you, and then the next day Mayo had left, and then a month after that you started Traction. How was that transition like? What got you to the point where you said, "Hey, I'm going to leave it now," and this is what I'm going to do? Like, what were some of the things that really helped you shape and actually take that jump? Because it's a pretty scary jump, right? Like one day you're working in this comfy, I was about to say 9 to 5, but really 9 to 9, right? Yeah, this is like 9 to 9 job. You're having amazing impact. You're building the first digital bank in Africa. You're building the first sort of logistic platform that tracks healthcare commodities across Africa. You did all of these things. And you also have the benefit of an amazing, stable, nice salary, right? And then you leave all of that and you say, hey, I'm going to go do something else, right? Talk us through, the audience, how you were thinking about it, what caused you to actually make that jump, right? At that point in time.
Yeah. So I think for like I said earlier, right, it was a jump I was going to make, right? I think I was very clear, even coming post biz school to McKinsey second time. Like I said, it's not an easy jump to make. Myself and my co-founder had been talking for a while about building Traction, right? And we both in different different ways at interface with like small businesses, and we were really clear that there was a big opportunity there, and we wanted to do it. The question was always when. When do we do it, right? So my co-founder left McKinsey earlier than I, and then he also went and did other stuff, right? He worked at a ride alien startup as COO. He did some stuff there. And I think it was late 2019, we kind of started to say, okay, look, let's get serious about this thing that we've just been talking about. And so he actually took the jump a little earlier. So he had left the ride alien startup and then he just pretty much went and, just started Traction, right? We went, our thesis has obviously morphed quite a bit since we started, but it was just a case of look, let's just start to put something together. And so he went and started that, and coincidentally for me, I had also just had a baby, and so I was on long paternity leave. I think that was that opportunity to also just completely take a step back, right? And just be like, okay, what am I actually like? Why why continue to delay this thing? It's really what I always wanted to do. It was also right timing, right? I think that was important in kind of just seeing the way the market was shaping. It's like, look, if you don't jump in now, it's going to be too late.
Yeah.
And I had a discussion with my wife, which is important. You
gotta get a sign off.
Just to be clear on what was to, just to be clear on what was to come. And yeah, she was supportive, right? I think she kind of also knew, right? Because my last 6 months at McKinsey was always I was already very restless, right? Sure. And so she kind of knew it was coming, and she kind of gave a blessing. And so post my paternity leave, came back and basically just told them I was leaving.
What was there? And I bring this up because, especially in the light of COVID, right, it's a lot of people who are transitioning to do something that they are restless about, right? What were your biggest fears? And at some point, did you ever say, hey, actually, especially in the early days, I wish I could go back?
I'll tell you the fun story, right? It was, so I left February, right? Pretty much last day of February. And I started at Traction because my co-founder was already there, right? I started at Traction literally first working there in March. And that was pretty much when the COVID wave started. And so it was pretty much the worst possible time to
actually be starting a business,
left. To actually be starting a starting a business that was going after physical sellers.
Exactly.
It was literally the worst possible time. And so literally like, my first 2 weeks into like starting, it looks like there's going to be a lockdown, right? COVID is spreading to see. And so, there was like really like no time to like feel like, and like get your way into this thing. We had to, what we were building before then was an inventory solution for physical sellers. And so we basically are like, look, if we don't pivot, even this is like pivot before launching, literally. If we don't pivot this thing, we're not going to have a business to run, right? So 2 weeks in, it was really like calling all the engineers and saying, guys, we're going to have to completely like, tweak what we're building, because it looks like there might be a lockdown, and essentially our customers won't be able to operate. And so I think 3 weeks in or 4 weeks in, so 3 weeks in, we had to like almost remote work. And I think like a week or two after, the government declared a lockdown, right? And so we had to like pretty much get all the engineers work like day and night, and we kind of like launched essentially like a very quick e-commerce platform for businesses at that time, right? Because that was the only thing that was running and operating. And so it was like it was literally like we weren't sleeping, right? All of that period, because, it was like you had no choice. And so that was like the first acid test, right? Of like, this stuff isn't like, it's not, it's fun, but it's not, it's, you don't really have like luxury of time or, of anything in this. So that was my first welcome. And I think that, while it was tough, but it was also a bit adrenaline kind of like, pumping, right? Where you now have to be like really solve a real problem. We had, I think then about like, 12 people on our team who we needed to pay salaries every day.
Oh, wow.
And we hadn't raised, right? So we were we hadn't raised money, and so we were pretty much running the business out of like savings, and so for the first 12 months, myself and my co-founder didn't take a salary.
Oh, wow.
And that wasn't fun either, because I just had had like a baby that was like transitioning and growing, and so we had to just completely leave of our savings for the first 12 months, and like cut, we had an office, we kind of like shut the office down, to save on rent. We sold like a furniture to kind of like make to make money.
Oh, wow. Did your wife come to you at some point and just say, hey, Mayo, go get a job?
No, I think it was too early then. But yeah, there were those moments where, in the middle of all of that, where you just be like, I could just be at McKinsey now, and not, and not be bothered about this, exactly, and every time it's like the 24th of the month is approaching, you are like, oh shit, it's payday, and all of that, right? We actually had to, so we did end up having to actually do some consulting at the end of the day, to kind of pay the bill. After a while, I was basically like, okay, look, this thing is taking off, we are still building, we've got bills to pay. It was basically either look to raise money or, but we didn't want to raise at the time, because, you kind of want to have some validation, in the market before you go out and take other people's money. And so, myself and my co-founder, were ex-consultant. That was the one thing we knew we could do very quickly. So we kind of started to split our time probably for about, I think we did that for about 6 to 9 month period, where we were splitting our time. A lot of it though was like, we did some tech related consulting. We had engineers, and so we also built product for other people just to kind of like bring in extra cash, right? I think these are the things that like entrepreneurship teaches you is, you need to like adapt very quickly, or you will die.
It's an interesting point you're making. So let me just make sure I recap and understand that. So you started Traction Apps. It didn't start out as, just correct me if I'm wrong, it didn't start out as sort of solving the payment pain points, right, that SMEs face right now. It started as some sort of inventory management system. And then because of COVID, you had to pivot it into some sort of e-commerce, helping people go online because that's what everybody wanted to do at that time. And then, to also sort of stay in business, you also started doing some consulting and sort of building, applications for other people by the side. So you basically started from one point and then it morphed over several different iterations. Like, is that what you had to go through?
Exactly. Exactly, right? So we started with like an inventory solution that we didn't even have the time to really sell. And then, we moved into e-commerce. That was the thing. The consulting was more like, a thing of necessity, right? And then we kind of eventually found ourselves in payment, right? So after e-commerce, and then the lockdown started to ease, right? So the way we had built the e-commerce platform at the time was, we still built it in a way that, physical sellers could still use it when business opened, right? So when the lockdown eased, we went back to trying to sell that to customers, right? And it turned out that, it was something that, businesses would kind of say, yeah, it's really nice. Like, inventory management is a problem for me. But when it came to like, okay, now let's move you onto this platform, there was so much inertia, right? But the other thing that then happened with COVID was that digital payments, just went completely like crazy, right? And banks were not opened. Agency banking was like the thing. And what agency banking had done was kind of like, educated customers that, they can transact with their card at merchant locations, and didn't have to always like withdraw cash. And so we went back trying to sell to our merchant, and they kept on telling us about this. Actually, the real problem they have now is, their customers are coming and asking, do you accept, do you accept cards, right? Do you have a POS terminal? And they didn't have. And the banks were slow at the time to kind of like see that shift, right? And we're talking about like the really small merchants, right? The banks were slow to see that shift. And so we kept, trying to push this inventory thing down their throat, and, they weren't buying it. They weren't buying it. And, the payment thing was the thing that kept coming up, right? And so we just told ourselves, hey, we need to like, this is like what people want, and so we needed to do a pivot, and so we pivoted essentially a third time. And this was all in a very short space of time, right? So
how many months are we talking about here?
2020.
Is it weeks? Is it months? How long?
So we started I started in March, right? And between March, we launched our e-commerce like end of April. The lockdown happened in like east around like June, and we launched payment in October. Right? So
yeah,
we're
wow, that's crazy.
Like, 7 month period, right? Having to like do a lot of like constant iteration.
Let me ask a question here. Mario, let me ask a question here. So, can you tell me a little? So it looks like Traction Up going through like series of iterations, right? Can you tell me a little bit about what the company is now? Who are the customers? So, like, who are the guys that are using your services and your applications? And what is like the big pain point that you're solving? Because I think what is really interesting, right, in what you said, is if you try and solve a problem which is not a pain point, nobody's going to buy what you've got, right? You really have to solve something which is like a real pain point for the users to stand a chance, right? So just tell me a little bit around who are the customers, who, as a big business, a small business, what's the pain point, etc. I think that'd be great to hear.
Yeah. So, I mean, let me go into like selling mode, right? No, but so we're pretty much building, the way, the kind of like easier way to like help people understand it. We're building Square for Africa, right? And we are helping a lot of, businesses to accept digital payments for the first time. Right. And so a lot of our customers are, small, semi-formal. I wouldn't say they're, informal, but they're like semi-formal businesses. Typically, the business owner and maybe like, one staff or two staff, right? And the biggest and the first pain point that we help them to solve is, we will enable you to start accepting, digital payments from your customers in a very easy and seamless way. And so today we enable, payment acceptance via card. So that's actual POS terminals, and also via bank transfers, right, which are very popular in Nigeria, right? And before us, right, these guys would typically have had to go to a bank, who would tell them to, meet a number of requirements, both in terms of like the formalization of their business, and also in terms of like minimum transaction thresholds, right? And I always tell the story of our very first customer, right? So this guy was, he sells pasta and turkey in Yaba, right? In a very like, small, like roadside shed. He used to bank with a bank. I won't mention the name. And, I'd asked them for a terminal for, I think, about 18 months, and, they just didn't like answer him. And we came and said, hey, we can give you a terminal in 24 hours. Right. And so it was pretty much like a no-brainer, right? So what we do is really just lower the barrier to entry for these businesses. We enable them to own their terminals so that they don't have like minimum transaction targets, but we allow them pay instrumentally, right, for the terminals. So it's really easy for them. And we then, like, over time, we also launch like acceptance via bank transfers, right, so that these guys could actually open accounts in their business names for the very first time. Many of them, either two would like just be running the business from their personal accounts. And so we noticed that as well. And so now we enable them to also now create accounts in their business name. So they are more formal. They can separate their business finances from personal. And we have now, so that's our entry point, is typically payments. And we have now, morphed and into like now offering them, more and more services, going from lending, onto like even, connecting them to other partners that can help them grow.
Fantastic. And how many, I don't know whether you can share this, but how many, can you give us a sense of how big the size is now in terms of customer base, in terms of number of transactions? Like, how big are you now when it comes to Nigeria?
So right now we are at about 30,000 customers across the country. We have customers in about 21 states of Nigeria, but we do have physical presence in about 6 states. We're just opening up to 7 states now, but we have customers that also just found us via online, via digital marketing, and we basically ship devices to them, or they just use the bank transfers. So that has been growing steadily, right? On average, we're growing sort of like 20% month on month, right? In terms of both customer numbers and also transaction volumes.
Fantastic. So about 30,000 customers now across multiple states in Nigeria. The Square of Africa, like you sort of put it, those for the audience, those of you who don't know Square is, I think, $110 billion valuation company based out of the US. So Mayowa is onto something big here. Maya, we should talk after this conversation. 110 billion is a lot of money. And you've basically been growing roughly about 20%. When did you realize that? Obviously, you've seen how, I'm sure you're very cognizant of how Square has done it in the US, right? When did you realize that this is going to be like a big thing in Nigeria, right? When did you actually start to see, the growth and the customers and, 20, like what made you sort of get a conviction this could be big?
Yeah. So remember I said that when we were pushing the inventory management thing, down customers' throat, right? And they weren't buying it. I think, what completely shifted for us was when we actually launched payment, it was the complete opposite, right? It was the customers now chasing us down, right? I remember we launched in October, right? But we actually signed our first customer in early September. Right, for a product that we had not even finished building, but we, and then our partner bank, gave us a 6 weeks delay, and it was now the customer was calling us literally every single day, I need this thing, I need this thing, I need this thing. And I think for us that was very clear that okay, we had basically hit the jackpot, right? It's like when your customers are the ones chasing you, then you know that you are onto something, right? And so we at that point just completely retooled the team, post any build on the inventory bit and just be like, okay, now we let's really double down on payments, right? And start to now really build something here. And I think over the months that came after, a lot of that conviction was even much more reinforced, right? When we also started to see what was happening in other markets, right, that were very similar in Nigeria. And so we started talking to people, in India. We spoke to Bharat Pay, in terms of what they had done in India. We spoke to folks in Indonesia as well and South Africa. And, then it was like, oh, wow, this is something. And we were early, right? We were early to the space, right? I'll probably say we were probably the first, or maybe it was the second, company that really was going after businesses that's an independent, and I wasn't doing agency banking, right? I was really going after businesses. We were quite early, but kind of then talking to all of these people, he was like, okay, look, we are onto something, and if we could really double down, it could be really big.
Fantastic. Mayo, I'm very excited to talk about what's next for Traction out there. But before we do that, as a startup, tech startup on the continent, I typically see, 3 or 4 problems, right? One is customers, which I think we've spoken about, and sort of scaling the customer base. Second one is funding and making sure you don't run out of cash. Third one is building a team, and the fourth one is whatever country you're in, what are the challenges, regulations, etc. Right? Just to get your thoughts on number 2 and number 4, right? So number 2, funding, and how do you make sure you don't run out of cash, right? You have, how much VC funding have you raised to date?
So I don't know if I can on air, fully disclose what we've raised.
Yeah.
And just because we haven't, actually announce any of our fundraising for many reasons, partly because of number 4.
Okay. All right.
And so we like to stay under the radar, just until,
But how big are we talking about? Are we talking about a couple of 100,000? Are we talking in the millions? Rough sense. Which
no. So I think yes. It's we've raised today. It's in the 7 figures, right? I think that
okay.
We have, right. We started out just raising a very small round. I can actually mention that it was like 100K, which is like complete just family and friends. Round. And we started this in October, right? Like that, we didn't want to raise until we had enough conviction, right? That we had a product that could actually scale in the market, right? And, didn't want to take people's money. But immediately we kind of like launched in October and we're like, okay, now finally this is something that can take off. Then we decided to like raise a very small round then, we've raised about 2 rounds after that. Again, I think that to this thing with funding, right, is also, I think when you also find the right product and the right market fit, then funding starts to become easier, right? So what happened, actually raising our first institutional round, we weren't actually raising money, right? It was literally just like a casual chat with like someone that runs a local fund, and he heard about what we were doing, and it was like, shit, no, I need to
get in.
I need to invest. I need to get in, right? And we basically created the round for him, and they were the only investors in that round. And then from then on, it became a bit like much easier to raise, right? Because it was then clear that there was a product that could really that was solving a real problem in the market.
I know you touched on this a bit earlier, right? But how did you guys survive? So you started 2020. I think your first raise was sometime of 2021, right? How did you guys survive all the time? Was there a time when you felt like, you looked at your bank account, you're like, we're a couple of days away from going bankrupt, right? Did that ever happen to you? How did you manage? How did you feel? How did you manage that?
Yeah, so I remember we did have to, I think we took out a loan late 2020. From, well, 2 things actually. One is I basically withdrew out of my pension account.
Man, you went, this is you going all in. This is all in,
Yeah,
wow.
It was so this is like late, like then like September or something. I basically took money out of my pension account, just to and my co-founder also had like money that he had saved up, and we pretty much put all of the money into the business, and then we started to raise in October. And at that point, we it was like, if we didn't raise, we're going to like just shut down. We started raising, and then, the way these things happen is that people make commitments, and then, they tell you, I'm going to pay you. I'm committing, but the money can only come in 2 months, etc. And so, there were some months where we actually, paid salaries like maybe like a week late, and just like, at least for like the more senior folks, and just explain to them, money's coming, and we're just like literally waiting for one person to wire their check, so that we could meet payroll. So yeah, I mean, that happened, I think, for like, there was like basically like a 3 to 4 month period where like money was really tight, and we were just like, seeking seeking validation and all. But I think, I think there are folks that, just to be also a bit honest, I think there are folks that probably had it worse. I think we were lucky that, one, we got a consulting gigs like in the middle of COVID that gave us enough money to run. But even there, with like that flexibility to know that, hey, you've got some skills, you can use it, it can bring in money. Even though we're doing consulting, but we were not earning a dime from it. It was just going, it was all going to to pay salaries, right? But at least, you know, we had that source, and, you know, I had a pension account that I could go to. Yeah, I mean, I think the air folks will obviously, like, you know, find it a bit tougher, right? You know, and have to, like, you know, resort to a bit more extreme measures, right? But I think we were a bit lucky, right? You know, to also, you know, when we started the family and friends round, to also have a couple of folks around us that we could very quickly, raise from, and, you know, could really, like, you know, get us money out, very, very quickly. Yeah.
So Mike, I guess for me, what I'm hearing from you is, you know, a couple of things that I think a lot of people who are sort of thinking about jumping on this sort of tech startup entrepreneurship journey may not necessarily be aware. I think one is just the importance of that support network around you, right? Family and friends, like you said. And then I think the second one I'm picking up from you is, it's actually tough, right? Like, you have to really believe in the idea and believe that, hey, this thing is actually going to be successful. For you to get comfortable, to get to the point where you're like drawing into your pension fund, you know, taking a loan. I mean, these are huge decisions, right? So unless you have deep conviction that, hey, this thing is going to work, and you have the data and the customer validation is there, it's very hard to achieve. And obviously the third one is, there are some days where you're going to have to delay making certain payments and be very close to the edge. Hey, you know, it's all worked out very nicely. What's next for Traction Apps as you think about the next sort of 3 to 5 years?
Just to end that thought, right, is that even though, yes, it's not easy and it's tough, right? But it does always, I think, once you have that conviction, right? And I think that conviction, you get a lot really from your customers, right? You know, you can read all the market reports and all, right? But, you know, your customers really tell you at the end of the day, right? Like, if you've got something, is, you know, if you're able to ride that wave, right, of the first few months, right, then, you know, things start to shape up, right? So just not to discourage people, is, you know, really, you know, it might be tough in the early days, but really, you know, once you hit the jackpot, you know, then, you know, it becomes much easier.
Fantastic. What's next? What's next for Traction Apps?
So for us, right, we're pretty much at the stage, you know, where we believe we've kind of gone past product market fit, right? And it's really about scaling and, you know, proving that this is beyond something that, you know, a few, you know, hundreds of customers are interested in, that this is something that, you know, thousands of customers want to buy into. So we are, growing, you know, quite aggressively. Both, you know, like our first initial focus is growing within Nigeria. And we are 30,000 today. Over the next sort of, like, you know, 12 months, we're trying to get to 200,000 customers on board.
In Nigeria.
And also now in Nigeria, specifically. And from a product standpoint, you know, payments is still like an entry product, but, you know, we've also now launched loans and lending for merchants, because they all go hand in hand, right? You know, once you digitize your payment as a business, there's now enough transparency to be able to give you access to capital and help you to grow. So we launched that. It's 6 months in, and so we're going to continue to grow that product as well, right? And, you know, we basically want to be, you know, in 12 months' time, right? It needs to be like, if you're a business and if you're starting a business in Nigeria, right, and you're looking for a partner, right, you know, the first name is Traction. You know, that's really where we're trying to go. And then we are also now starting to look into, you know, to de-risk, you know, number 4 that you mentioned, you know, what are other countries that we can now, you know, look to expand in. And we'll probably be making moves on that probably, early next year, opening up a second country.
Are you coming over here to Ghana?
It's on the short list. It's on the short list, right?
Fantastic.
I think for many obvious reasons. But yeah, let's see.
Fantastic. Finally, any advice for the audience, who's sort of listening, thinking of having the same level of restlessness that you've had for a number of years? Like, what advice would you share?
Yeah, so I think that maybe if I kind of say 2 or 3 things, right, that are important, right? I think one is the importance of being really adaptable, right? Especially now, like in the climes that we're in, right? There's so many things that like changing rapidly, and so it's really important that you are you're adaptable. Adaptable is, both in terms of like your customer needs and what your customers would want, and being flexible enough to say, hey, tear apart what you have and like, start again if you need to. But also adaptable in how you also solve it, right? And so, could you do this while you're at a job and, still make sure that you have like the cushion of income, and get some validation? Do you need to go find a co-founder because it's going to make things much easier? And so you just need to be much flexible, right? And saying there are multiple parts to, or could you even, solve a problem within another business, right? That's something that at Traction we are even now encouraging our staff, right? Who's like, hey, you have this thing, we're happy to actually support you to build it within Traction and put some funding behind it, right? So could you even do that, right? There are many routes to solving problems, and so it's just important that you remain flexible. I think second is, I mentioned it a little bit in the first, is actually find a partner, right? You never want to be on this journey alone. And maybe if I broaden that point, is like find a support system, right? First support system will be, if you have a spouse or a significant other, that's the first important support system, because when all the madness happens, you want to at least have one place where there's peace. And you can always take time out, but also as you're running a business, find a co-founder where you guys your values align and you're both in it, right? Because in those days when things are tough, right, you don't want to be completely alone, thinking these things like 2 heads are always better than 1, 3 even better than 2. So find a partner that you guys are, and that you're also friends, right? Because that's just important. The days you wouldn't always agree on things, right? But because you guys are friends, right? You can completely segment issues properly. Also find people around you, co-workers, etc. Friends, family, that also believe in you, that can also be, support systems, in those early days, right? And they don't always have to be like people who would invest, right? It might just even be like connecting you to customers, right? Or connecting you to partners. A lot of our first partners were just folks that, people connected us to, right? And then things moved very, very fast. So I think that's number one is kind of be adaptable. 2 is, build a support system before you launch out. And the third is just enjoy the ride, right? Have fun as much as you can. You will be, I think I was saying earlier, when we were chatting informally, that I think I don't work less hours. So probably, my wife said I work even longer hours these days, but I'm having fun, right? And I'm actually, genuinely enjoying what I'm doing. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters, right? Just that you're happy and you're fulfilled. Yeah.
Fantastic. Mayowa, Thanks a lot for taking the time out. I must say it's really great catching up with you after all these years. And hearing about your journey. It's an exciting journey. It's very inspirational. We wish you and Dolapo and the folks at Traction all the best, and looking forward to having you in Ghana very soon. Keep it at the top of the short list.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, and hopefully it's Ghana, right? I'm sure we'll probably be in Ghana at some point this year. So definitely
fantastic. Fantastic. All right. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you. Cheers.